Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Wednesday, and this feels like it's been a long week so far, and it's just getting started.
I know, there's so much news, and
so
heavy news
happening.
in the last 2 weeks. It's been like...
Very heavy, I know. A lot of heavy for many of our viewers, and we appreciate you sticking with us and getting through it.
So coming up on Rising, once again, the Trump administration is facing accusations of trying to whitewash American history.
Plus, Luigi Mangione's terrorism charges have actually been tossed. Some of his supporters were cheering over it. And
as Israel begins their offensive into Gaza City, a UN commission is saying Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. So, Robby, let's start with what's on your radar first.
All right, Attorney General Pam Bondi has made quite the First Amendment-related faux pas in a recent interview about what the federal government could do to deter political violence in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. She said the federal government would go after anyone engaged in hate speech. Bondi should know, however, that hate speech is vigorously protected by the First Amendment and, as such, cannot be policed. Now, unfortunately, the Attorney General made an illusory distinction between free speech and hate speech, implying that the latter was subject to government action. There's free speech and then there's hate speech, and there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society. That's what she said. Take a look.
There's free speech and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society.
Do you see more law enforcement going after these groups who are using hate speech and putting cuffs on people so we show them that some action is better than no action?
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech.
Bondi sounds like Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's pick to be vice president, who made similar claims during the 2024 campaign. And that's a very bad thing, because both of them are appallingly wrong. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that so-called hate speech falls under First Amendment protection, most recently in the 2017 case Mittal versus Tam, which was decided unanimously after numerous commentators, including many fellow conservatives, called out Bondi. She tried to clarify her remarks. She said she was referring to, quote, hate speech that crosses the line into threats of violence. Okay, well, she's correct that true threats of violence against specific individuals or against institutions, those do lose First Amendment protection if they're specific enough, though general advocacy of violence is usually still protected. You can say it. This kind of speech isn't called hate speech, though. It's called incitement. Hate speech on its own, simply not a separate category of unprotected speech from the standpoint of the Supreme Court. Now, in a separate interview, Bondi also suggested that employers had an obligation to fire employees for engaging in hate speech or for actions such as refusing to print pro-Kirk posters at Office Depot. Let's watch.
Employers, you have an obligation to get rid of people. You need to look at people who are saying horrible things, and they shouldn't be working with you. Businesses cannot discriminate. If you want to go in and print posters with Charlie's pictures on them for a vigil, you have to let them do that. We can prosecute you for that. I have Harmeet Dillon right now in our civil rights unit looking at that immediately, that Office Depot had done that. We're looking at that.
Given the conservative legal advocates have worked tirelessly to defeat public accommodation laws that clash with private entities' moral, political, or religious beliefs, many on the right were not pleased to hear Bondi adopting this position. The Daily Wire's Matt Walsh called her opinion insane and said that President Trump should fire her. Senator Ted Cruz similarly clarified that the First Amendment absolutely protects hate speech, while noting that individuals could still suffer professional consequences for saying cruel things about Kirk. Ironically, Bondi could have avoided this mess had she listened more closely to one specific person, Charlie Kirk. As journalist Brad Palumbo pointed out, Kirk previously wrote on X, hate speech does not exist legally in America. There's ugly speech, there's gross speech, there's evil speech, and all of it is protected by the First Amendment. Keep America free. Words to remember. And so, Lindsey, people are very upset on the right with Pam Bondi over this, and it is important because the whole public accommodation thing, this is the bake me a cake case, remember that? Yeah. Conservatives have fought for the right to say if you're a cake baker or a wedding photographer, you don't agree with same-sex marriage, you should not be required to perform that service in violation of your religious beliefs. And there's a cake baker, it's a Colorado case, I believe, got sued by a couple, and it's a whole Supreme Court case. The point being, conservatives have worked forever to defeat that rule that you must cater to a customer you don't agree with politically, religiously, ethically, morally. This would be doing the same thing. And her not recognizing that was a big, flashing warning sign for Matt Walsh and other conservatives I agree with. Given the Epstein thing, given this, I saw numerous people on the right expressing the idea, well, how many strikes does this lady get before we say, okay, you're not doing what we want?
That's the biggest thing. I think the overall, and from the other side of the aisle looking at it, it's like, well, what is important to the party? Because if Pam Bondi is saying the exact thing that was railed against, and President Trump for years has went at being at the top of the Republican Party, but I'll say most people in the party have gone on about censorship and how much this needs to stop. And so to say that you want to implement it on a level of calling it a crime and putting people possibly behind bars for the things that they've said, that to me is even a step further than the party ever even wanted to have a conversation about. We were just talking about canceling mostly during 2020 and past that of people who said things online that were negative and just canceling them from their job, which private employers are, like you said, able to do whatever they want.
Yeah, they can do whatever they want. But we don't need to bring the government in.
Right, it doesn't need to be like a rule or a law. The biggest thing to me is that digital vigilantes to me don't need to exist online to the point that everyone needs to even lose their job. Past what Pam Bondi's saying, I think that we're going down a rabbit hole of the exact opposite, coming from the people of the party with the exact opposite thoughts. So Elon Musk in 2023 literally tweeted, if you're, quote, unfairly treated by your employer due to posting or liking something, we will fund your legal bill, no limit. Please let us know. And you remember around that time, it was around cancel culture, like the height of it, or the Republican Party starting to see their power grow and saying, we're not going to allow cancellations to happen. It's why X kind of does what it does. I don't like any of the negativity online surrounding the death of Charlie Kirk and people laughing or anything like that. But I do think employers have their own options. I don't think the government should be involved in trying to make people, specifically federal workers, because those are the first people that they can fire, right? Just because they don't like what they said. I think it could be a conversation. We can talk about a moral code, but if it comes to against the law, now we're rolling way past what's appropriate, because then we must comb through all the instances where other parties were offended, and there are several.
Right. It's not against the law, so we should dispense with any kind of legal ramifications for speech, for justification for violence, gross, ugly, not a legal issue. Now, you can suffer professional workplace consequences. I think the line that Vice President J.D. Vance drew was a fine one, saying we should not try to cancel or go after people who just expressed disagreement with Kirk or didn't like Kirk. He called on people yesterday
to get fired
for advocacy or appreciation for or justification for violence. That's the line he drew. Now, I'm not someone who, I don't really like the whole kind of call your manager type deal. So am I going to be sitting around, looking for people who said kind of shady things to get fired? Absolutely not. I think conservatives have better ways to spend their time, probably. I'm not a fan of social media derived mobs, but if you justified violence in public, that was a pretty bad choice you made. Maybe just leave those thoughts to yourself. Like you said yesterday, if you don't have anything nice to say,
it's classic
don't say it.
101.
No, it's great advice.
I think it would behoove the Republican Party to have come up with a strategy together rather than the knee-jerk reaction that we're seeing of everybody getting on podcasts, responding, and because then you have what Pam Bondi is doing, who was speaking openly. And I know it's been the party of transparency, right, to try to get on those podcasts immediately and have dialogue.
I'm glad we got to hear what you had to say. I just don't like what you had to say.
Well, that's what I mean. The dialogue's all over the place. It's kind of like, okay, let's cancel everybody. Wait, we hate cancellation culture. What so it's just like, how about we first start with bringing the country together and saying this was wrong. Let's try to rectify this from ever happening again.
Well, next up, the alleged Charlie Kirk shooter is making his first court appearance, and we have learned more about his potential motives from the indictment. We will be discussing that. Stay with us.
I do not take this decision lightly, and it is a decision I have made independently.
Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for the accused shooter of Charlie Kirk. 22-year-old murder suspect Tyler Robinson appeared virtually from Utah County Jail for his first court appearance while wearing a green vest, which court officials say was to prevent self-harm. Now, Robinson listened to the 7 charges against him, which include witness tampering and aggravated murder, which is a capital offense. The motive of the shooting has been one of the case's biggest topics of discussion so far. Utah County's top prosecutor is shedding some light on that. Take a listen.
Robinson's mother explained that over the last year or so, Robinson had become more political and had started to lean more to the left, becoming more pro-gay and trans rights oriented. She stated that Robinson began to date his roommate, a biological male who was transitioning genders. When asked why he did it, Robinson explained there is too much evil and the guy, referring to Charlie Kirk, spreads too much hate.
Authorities also confirming the suspect's fingerprints were found on the bolt-action rifle believed to be the murder weapon. Now, prosecutors also releasing text messages between the suspect and his roommate confessing that he murdered Kirk, even directing his roommate to a note left under his keyboard, Robinson fretting about getting the rifle back. In fact, he appeared to show more concern about retrieving the rifle, which once belonged to his grandfather, than about violently taking the life of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, so these text messages are very interesting, very indicative of guilt on the part of Tyler Robinson. He says, like, "Oh, my love, I'm sorry that you're caught up in this," type thing. That's not a direct quote. That's not exactly what they
yeah,
say. Something
very, but a lot of
along
my
that
loves were in
nature.
the message.
Yeah, which people took notice of. He explains, he said, doing it because the hate is just out of control and this is how you deal with it. He refers to his dad. He said, like, his dad wouldn't understand because his dad's diehard MAGA. So we can fill in the blanks here a little bit at this point. It does suggest a left-wing motivation, that he killed, allegedly, Charlie Kirk for having views that are anti-trans or anti-gay, and that's the motivation. It's pretty clear at this point. It's funny that there are still some mainstream commentators denying that, including Jimmy Kimmel, who I still said, I think yesterday or the night before, say something about this, white male Republican family shooter. Okay, he doesn't share his family's views, but anyway.
Right. I think it's worth pointing out because the point
We got to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah, but the point is that, Democrats didn't kill Charlie Kirk. It's just a person that killed Charlie Kirk. And that's just the bottom
Right, but
line.
that person is not a Republican.
But words don't kill people.
That's a newsflash to Jimmy Kimmel, I guess.
Yeah, but words also don't kill people. We talk about that, right? The people kill the people. And so the point is that he may even have this grievance about the way that Charlie Kirk addresses the trans community. But he himself is not of the trans community. And so a lot of the dialogue, even prior to the shooting happening around the trans community because of the school shooting, was that we should perhaps take away the Second Amendment rights of the trans community. Mm-hmm. And so by opening up this dialogue, to me, the conversation could take a quickly wrong turn about punishing a community that's not even involved in this shooting. A man decided to defend the honor of a community.
Well, he's doing it right.
Yeah,
he did it on behalf of the trans
But no one
community.
asked him to do that, right? So, like, if you go do something on behalf of the black community, you still do not represent the black community as much as you're my brother, Robby. You know what I mean? Like, you still don't. That's just the bottom line. So that's what I mean. And I want to make sure that these arguments don't start to get conflated so that we're punishing a group that already feels extremely marginalized on behalf of somebody who just decided to be some martyr in his mind that nobody asked him to be. Because even the boyfriend or his partner was surprised and confused, like, is this really you? 20 question marks. So as we're seeing these text messages come in, you understand that it's not the trans person that felt this deeply involved in the grievances. And we can go into a whole slew with a therapist about why growing up in a MAGA household, as he said, he was afraid to communicate with his father, or a Trump or a Republican household, whatever, may have pushed him away. There's so much dichotomy inside of a family relationship that could be broken down by some kind of therapist or breaking down why somebody kills someone. But I can't say that because they watch MSNBC they did this. I'm not ever going to go down that rabbit hole.
Either. So I want to introduce, though, a kind of provocative aspect of this. I was seeing, and I don't agree with this, but I'm certainly seeing it said on social media, including by some prominent people. The text messages themselves, I'm seeing people say they don't believe they're real. Are you?
So I didn't want to even go down that rabbit hole. Because I feel
clear,
like
I do believe they're real, and the elaborate nature of the conspiracy would have to be for these to be fake. I mean, law enforcement would have to be either in on that or totally incompetent. But so there are two categories of people I'm seeing say that this doesn't sound the way young people say. To me, it sounds the way young people are actually at all, so I just don't agree with that. But the two people I'm seeing say that are people who, on the left, who don't want the text messages to be true because they think it makes the transgender community look bad or left-wing people look bad. That's one category. The other category is some very far right kind of people who are now introducing the idea, I've seen this, that it was... It's crazy that Israel was behind it, the Israeli government, because Charlie Kirk had apparently faced some pressure from donors who are pro-Israel that, because so many young conservatives, including Turning Point affiliated young conservatives, are much more skeptical of what Israel is doing, opposed to it, and they had some kind of meeting in the Hamptons in August about various topics being discussed, debated, and people are, in my view, falsely contending that like Turning Point was like wavering or annoying Jewish or pro-Israel donors, and then they orchestrated this hit. I think it's fanciful and absolutely ridiculous, but you would need to delegitimize these texts because we have a suspect in custody with a clear motivation, so you'd have to say that that's made up in order to get to the Israel did it, which,
well, I think
to be clear, I think is insane.
Two things, like the job of the journalist is to look into this and figure out what could possibly be true. It's also the job of the American people to ask questions and to try to figure out why things, that don't look right, don't feel right in the government, things that haven't looked right or felt right have been proven to be cover-ups or, et cetera. It's not like we're absolved of doing this ever. However, I think it's important to make sure that, you're not allowing misinformation to fuel a conspiracy theory because you can have access to whatever you're looking for online. Somebody will find the reason why it makes sense. To me, I was just looking at it and wondering when we see these things happen in the past, like people write manifestos or commit any killings, we'll see somebody in a group that has cultivated this mindset for a long time of where they've been indoctrinated in some people's minds and have dialogue about what they may or may not do. And you can kind of see the pattern. You'll see families say, oh yeah, I saw him doing some of these things. You usually don't see somebody whose partner is completely blindsided and then they write out in a speech kind of step by step, well, I left the gun, because I was reading it, like where it was left. Why? Oh, you saw me writing on the bullets or doing whatever he did to write his messages on the bullets. That's why I was doing this. Like, it's so broken down that it's almost like, okay, mystery completely solved so simply that he just told on himself in text message. Like,
that's exactly why people are falling.
Right, so that's why it's a reasonable question to ask about, wait, explain this to me, the text messages. People just want to understand, and I don't think there's anything wrong with asking the question. I just have seen people who, whether it could be any type of death, people leave notes behind, and they're sometimes very vague.
He's
leave the
Mormon.
Questions.
It reads very Mormon to me. Like, it's the tone of his writing is. I mean, he's a horrific killer. The tone of his writing is like polite and thorough.
And we can actually see
Mormon trait.
maybe text messages of their conversations over the last year are better than just going off of this. Like, what do they text like? Is he very like poetic in other messages to other friends and family? And then this will hopefully quell everybody's questions and fear about it.
It's just the thoroughness of the text isn't enough on its own because he clearly did it. And we have with the gun, going to have fingerprints, going to have all of that. So also the idea that Israel would want to kill Charlie Kirk. What if the vacuum is filled by someone who's...
Yeah, that one was an extreme claim. Speaking of Israel, they're launching their new offensive into Gaza City as the UN is releasing grim accusations against them. We'll talk about that right after the break. Don't go anywhere.
Israeli troops are launching a new ground operation in Gaza City as the nation continues its stated mission to completely eradicate the terrorist group Hamas. Now, France is strongly condemning this expanded offensive into Gaza, saying the campaign has no military logic. President Trump spoke out on the war, giving this dire warning to Hamas.
I hear Hamas is trying to use the old human shield deal, and if they do that, they're going to be in big trouble. They're going to be in big trouble. They put it out 2 days ago that they're going to use the hostages as human shields. That's something that has been done for a long time. If they put the hostages in front of them, Hamas, as protection, as what they call them bodyguards, Hamas is going to have hell to pay.
And thousands of Palestinians are fleeing the area. This is all happening on the same day a UN commission accuses Israel of committing genocide. This is what the UN Commissioner of Human Rights has to say.
What we see in front of us is first and foremost the terrible suffering of people of Palestine. Many of them have been multiply displaced. We see the piling up of war crime after war crime, of crime against humanity, and potentially even more. I mean, it's for the court to decide whether it's genocide or not, and we see the evidence mounting.
I think two things can be true at once. Like, yes, Hamas is guilty of terrible crimes and using its own citizens as shields, like we keep hearing, but Israel also is not absolved of all of the wrongdoings that have happened since then, when people say that they're violating international war and committing war crimes and starvation, a lot of things that we're having conversations about. And so I think now that we saw what happened in Qatar most recently, where they were attacking the place where the people were trying to come up with a peace deal, we're moving and inching even further and further away from that. And the part that bothers me the most is I read in the New York Times that some of the hostages' families are begging Netanyahu to please stop this offensive, because they know, and it can confirm, and it may be more, hopefully more, that at least 20 hostages are alive. And so if you are thinking that one of those people could possibly be your family member, wouldn't you say, please, if Hamas is using Palestinians as human shield, they possibly could be using my family member as well. Don't do this. You would think that comes into consideration now that Gaza City is pretty much obliterated from all the images that I've seen over the last 2 years. I mean, there's nothing left to pretty much take down. Everything is in shambles there.
Right. The safety of the hostages should certainly be a consideration. I don't know that it's the paramount consideration for the government. It certainly does for the families. They have every right to advocate for any action to be taken to get their loved ones back. Maybe that's not the same motivation for the government, but my question is, what is this going to accomplish? They've killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. They've killed tons of Hamas operatives. They killed the mastermind of the October 7th attacks. When will this end? When will they say it's enough? Will it be after literally all of the Palestinians have been wiped out? Because that seems to be the way it's headed. The government of Israel has not articulated any limiting principle or any. When does the mission accomplished banner go up, and when do we get back to allowing the Palestinians to have some level of governance and sustainability, have their lives back? Never, until they're just all dead. And previous presidential administrations in the U.S. exercised more pressure on Israel to cease killing everyone, for lack of a more precise term. That's the Biden did it differently. He just said that he gave them carte blanche to do whatever they want. I'm not sure he was even aware what was going on. And President Trump has tried to constrain them sometimes, but is not successful at it lately. I just don't see what this is going to accomplish except more wholesale destruction and devastation.
Right, and we just have to have a conversation about what America would like to do. I think where we can agree,
I would like to be not involved.
Is that America, most Americans don't want to, at the very least, whether they consider the war, they just don't want to be involved at this point.
Yeah.
So
why should we be?
The Trump administration is once again facing accusations of sanitizing America's history. I'll have more on that next in My Lens. Stick around.
Welcome back to Rising. Lindsey, what is in your lens today?
Let's get right to it. So history isn't supposed to be comfortable. It's supposed to be honest. But right now we're watching a dangerous trend, the sanitizing of America's past in order to sell a cleaner, prettier story. But no amount of bleach can wash the blood, scars, and chains out of this country's foundation. The Washington Post recently reported that exhibitions and signs about slavery are being removed from multiple national parks under orders from the Trump administration. Internal emails reviewed by the New York Times also reveal that the Park Service has been told to remove materials deemed, quote, inappropriately disparaging Americans. The translation for that, if it makes white America look bad, it's gotta go. At Fort Pulaski in Georgia, officials have been reportedly asked to pull the scourged back photo. It's a famous 1863 photo of an enslaved man with horrific scars on his back. That Department of Interior told The Hill, when they asked, that they did not ask for the removal of that photo. And they told The Hill, quote, if any interpretive materials are found to have been removed or altered prematurely in error, the department will review the circumstances and take corrective action as appropriate. At Harper's Ferry, more than 30 signs documenting racism faced by formerly enslaved people are slated for removal as well. The order is being interpreted broadly as anything addressing slavery, racism, sexism, LGBTQ rights, or indigenous persecution is now fair game for erasure. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. Since taking office, Donald Trump has consistently pushed policies and rhetoric that minimize or outright erase the experiences of marginalized communities, from painting over the Black Lives Matter mural in D.C. to temporarily scrubbing stories of Navajo code talkers from federal websites. His administration has treated Black and Indigenous history as disposable. Even on Juneteenth, the very day that commemorates the end of slavery, Trump complained that, quote, too many non-working holidays in America. Let's call it what it is. It's whitewashing, pun very much intended. Government sites have been scrubbed of words like injustice and oppression. School libraries have purged writings from amazing authors like Maya Angelou. Exhibits honoring Harriet Tubman and the Tuskegee Airmen have been sidelined, and critics say this is part of a pattern of words and actions designed to, quote, promote a more positive view of the nation's history. But it really is just erasing the parts that don't fit the fairy tale. Pretending that slavery, racism, and a campaign of mass displacement and extermination of indigenous people didn't shape this country won't bring us any closer to the ideals of freedom, equality, and justice. In fact, it pulls us further away. The past explains the present. If you erase the scars, you erase the story. And without the story, you erase the roadmap to progress. Simply saying things like slavery is bad and trying to end the conversation there seriously underplays the harm caused by an institution that forcibly uprooted millions of Africans and condemned them to lifetimes of bondage. Unless you're siding with the slave owners, it wasn't just bad, it was pure evil. So let's be clear, removing evidence in slavery or evidence of slavery and indigenous persecution doesn't make America stronger. It makes America dishonest. History is not a brand campaign, and no matter how much you try to rewrite the story, those scars, like the ones etched across the back of Gordon, the enslaved man in that Civil War photo that may or may not be removed, will always remain. Because the truth is this, America only becomes the nation it promises to be when it stops hiding from the past and starts facing it head on.
Well, I agree with you. I don't want to get rid of the vast majority of these things in all likelihood. I think they're being taken down in acts of malicious compliance. Do you know what that is?
No, break that down for me. I like that term.
That is when, well, I don't think you're going to like what I have to say about it, but that is when the administration will say something perfectly reasonable, like you can't have like pornographic books in the school library, and then they'll say, oh, you're saying we can't teach Maya Angelou or something.
So you're blaming local leaders for interpreting it wrong
They
on purpose.
interpret it wrongly, right? Wrongly on purpose to make the administration look bad.
Well,
the administration is not saying you can't celebrate the Tuskegee Airmen, you can't celebrate Harriet Tubman. I'll put Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill.
That should have happened.
I supported that. I want the gun photo, the one where she's holding a gun and saying, "Come with me to freedom."
Or we can just have a nice smiling faces.
No, I want gun and I want freedom. That's
so look,
beautiful.
I work on a series called World of Travel, where we talk about the past and the future of cities and countries around the world. And so we recently went to Philadelphia and we visited the first quote unquote White House, the president's house, which was George Washington's house. And we spoke with local leadership of the museum and local politicians, and they explained to us that they're getting direct orders from the Department of Interior to review the slave quarters, which is on display at the president's house to show that our first president indeed had slaves. That's not a secret. It's not in our history books, but it should be in history documented in schools, I'm saying. I don't think we learned that specifically, but it is documented if you'd like to find that information.
You learn it in schools, so you absolutely learn it in schools.
But that's something that I think people need to understand, like exhibits like that I saw with my own eyes.
They talk about it. They point out where they were buried.
Someone is sending the directive from the federal government. So if local officials are misinterpreting what the directive they're getting from federal, that's the confusing part. There should be laid out specific guidelines.
They're not misinterpreting it. They're wrongly interpreting it on purpose to make the administration look bad.
I don't think so. These people were genuinely concerned and telling me how much they're pushing back. And since I had direct dialogue with them, that's why I was so passionate about saying something in executive order, which is what we saw Trump do earlier this year, of like, we want to, as the 250th anniversary, we want to get closer to that and make the country have, stop spending so much time on the negative history. It's what I'm paraphrasing, but he also was talking about the Smithsonian, the African American History Museum, and saying about how basically just harps on negativity when he was there a couple of years ago and said quite the opposite. So it's just a change of tone, and people are misinterpreting it, as long as you're saying, because maybe they're confused by the direction. And so if the direction is coming from the federal government, there needs to be clear guidelines of what you're talking about. Because all the monuments that I've been to, as I've been able to travel across this country sometimes to different states that he's referring to, have had stuff that provides information to children and families and international people coming here trying to understand our history.
Right.
So to me, that should be clear if you're going to institute something that's an executive order that's so serious, because history really is the housing that makes sure that we don't end up repeating it in the future. We can't take the foundation out.
The Tuskegee Airmen display thing is an example of what I'm talking about, in my opinion. Right? They took down that because they said, oh, we got a mandate to un-DEI everything, so we got to take this down. And Pete Hegseth said, absolutely not. Don't take that down. That is not consistent with the order to get rid of DEI whatsoever, and in fact said that he thought it was malicious compliance. So we're not, that one was wrongly taken down. We should not.
But this is always the excuse. Even the Interior Department and the Hill, amazing reporting from our journalists at the Hill. They reached out to the Interior Department and they said, if this was wrongly taken down, we will take corrective steps. Everything can't be a knee-jerk reaction to an executive order. If there's something that you are deeply disturbed by as the president that wants to institute this widespread policy, which looks as to be an attack on anything of people of color or indigenous people or marginalized groups, if it is indeed not that, then clarify exactly what you're talking about. Because it's not like we have running rampant amount of sites across the country that are just showing the wrong history. So tell me why that needed to be an executive order, why it was this big emergency, and why we're reviewing these things anyway. Because I've been to that African American History Museum, and even his critiques of that, to me, besides from the poster online, we discussed that. They posted something online that talked about what was a white privilege, and and I said I don't agree with that. They took it down. They took it down. They apologized. But in the actual museum, point me one thing that didn't make sense. That's a beautiful example of our nation's actual history.
Right. But just because we think that you got to be a certain age to read The Bluest Eye or Beloved or whatever. Some of those are graphic books. Not saying they're going to get taken out of the library, just like you got to be 13 before you read it. Doesn't mean we're sanitizing all African American literature, right?
And just because we're mocking Juneteenth and telling everybody to go back to work doesn't mean we're being condescending.
Well, I think everybody should go back to work, not specifically for Juneteenth. Just a little too many of these holidays.
Everything is such a coincidence with you. Everything is just such a coincidence. It's like, come on now. You give too much grace.
President's Day, gone, all the days. All the days got to go.
You want no holidays? You want to be here on Christmas?
I'm a heartless man. Heartless.
Wow. But he does celebrate Halloween. Tells you something about Robby. Some of the biggest charges against Luigi Mangione have been dismissed. We'll talk about that after this. A New York judge dismissed charges of terrorism against Luigi Mangione on Tuesday, but the accused killer of the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson still faces second-degree murder charges.
Now, most of the ruling focused on whether or not the murder of Thompson should be considered an act of terrorism. The judge's statement reads in part, the question presented here is whether the defendant's act, no matter how heinous, fits with the definition of terrorism, and the defendant's apparent objective, as stated in his writings, was not to threaten, intimidate, or coerce, but rather to draw attention to what he perceived as the greed of the insurance industry.
The state of New York created its own statute to define terrorism after 9/11. It says terrorism is committing an offensive, quote, with intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping.
Dozens of people were gathered outside in support of Mangione during the hearing. Some of them, though not necessarily those pictured here, were seen cheering when word spread that the terrorism charges were being dropped. The 27-year-old has pleaded not guilty in relation to the killing that took place last December. His second-degree murder charge carries a possible 15 years to life sentence. First of all, I find the cheering for him
disgusting, deplorable.
Appalling.
Yeah, people shouldn't be celebrating.
People are so psychotic. There's nothing new about this. I feel the same way about the people who love Ted Bundy or Marilyn Manson or whoever. Or not Marilyn Manson. Charles Manson.
Yeah.
You can love Marilyn Manson. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Charles Manson.
I quite liked Marilyn.
No, Marilyn Manson's fine. Charles Manson is what I meant by that. Anyway, now in terms of him getting terrorism charges, the way the judge explained it there actually had me thinking, like, well, didn't he calling attention to, I don't know, Al-Qaeda is trying to call attention to things, ISIS is trying to call attention to things. What's the difference between calling attention to and trying to intimidate people on a political subject? So I actually didn't agree with that at all. Now, I don't love describing everything as terrorism, and I think terrorism has a very loose definition.
Well, I was reading through it,
and
I think
it's a left-wing political motivation.
Fine, it's a motivation, but he killed to make a statement, not to instill worldwide or United States-wide fear. And so that would fall under the guise of terrorism. And so if courts are not emotional, right? They're supposed to not be emotional. They're supposed to go by the books. What are the laws? What are the rules? And there's a precedent that you start to set if you overcharge people with things that actually don't align with how you define, especially, in New York, where 9/11 kind of opened up the door for how we define terrorism in the modern century.
So it's only terrorism when Muslims do it?
No, I'm just saying that's not the same thing as one person targeting one CEO. I don't think that his intention, according to the courts, was to instill widespread fear throughout the whole country. It was to make a statement, be it political, to say that the healthcare system is wrong. Obviously, he's expressed those views. So, of course, that's worth committing him for murder if he gets charged. If he's fully accused and guilty of that. But terrorism doesn't align to them right here. And I think, the courts are not going to stretch the terrorism statute in order to make him get more charges. We should just charge people with what they actually have done under what our law says.
I don't really care whether he gets life in prison or the death penalty. He should certainly get life in prison, at least. I'm not a huge proponent necessarily of the death penalty, but that for me, that's more because we've wrongly executed people. And if you execute someone, and you later find out the evidence was bad, you can't reverse that decision. I think in cases where the guilt is just overwhelmingly likely because of video evidence or whatnot, like in this case, I think it doesn't violate my moral code to have him executed. I don't really care one way or the other. I think that line between trying to intimidate the public and sending a message to the public by killing someone in a high-profile politically with an ideology and a statement to make, that is a blurry distinction to me. Or I'm just not satisfied that distinction exists at all.
Well, another thing that we can do is set a new guideline for the country, or states can implement this, is what they define terrorism as, and then any politically motivated killing can be terrorism. But just understand that if anybody does probably any attacks or anything, which we want to see them come all the way down, we're just calling this all terrorists. Like, it has to be the same, and has to be a precedent that we can now go off of, because we can't have one person being charged with this over here, one person being charged. Yes, the video says that he's done it, but in our courts, and the way that our courts work, is that you're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
And so although people should not be out there cheering for him or doing any of the nonsense that they're doing, the fact is that's how our court system works. And so they have to go by the law and by the book, and we would hope that the judicial system is not going based off the emotions and the video that we're all seeing and how riled up the American public is about something that we know to be true, right? There's still a process, even for terrorists. Yeah. There is a process in our legal system in the way that we prosecute them.
Yeah, it shouldn't really matter if it's terrorism. He killed someone in cold blood. It was premeditated, first-degree murder. It was not in self-defense. There is no mitigating factor here. He went out of his way. He made a plan to kill someone and did it. He should go to prison for the rest of his life or be executed, regardless of whether it's considered terrorism, is what I would say.
And my question is, so are you looking at...
And that's true for anyone in a similar situation, regardless of... If he killed the CEO of a bank or the CEO of Old Navy, I don't know why that popped into my head.
That's
any
not a
company...
political statement, probably, because they'll say...
Right, I'm saying whether it's a political statement or not, he should be in prison for the rest of his life or be executed.
But are you suggesting that then the court systems in New York are politically swayed to a way that they're trying to undercharge him? Because there's something that they gain from that? Because
I don't know.
It's like you're being insinuated, but I don't misquote you.
Adoring little Gen Z girls who are just obsessed with him or something.
So you think the courts are swaying to social media pressure by young girls?
I don't know what I'm saying.
That think Luigi Mangione is cute?
I don't know if that's motivating their decision. I think I think
that can't be what you can't believe that little of our court system. That's why I really wanted to clarify why you're saying when they're undercharging him, because I don't understand what the motivation would be when most of America, we're not talking about social media online and the fray that gets elevated. We're talking about most people in positions of power. The same way with Charlie Kirk, condemn that.
Was it 15 years to life or 20 years to life? 15 or 20 years in prison does not seem enough time if that's all he gets for this crime.
But overcharging somebody and then they're
I don't think it's possible to
not
overcharge
convicted.
them.
Yeah, but you're not. That's what I'm saying. You don't work in the judicial system in any way. So
Okay, you're right. I'm
You're
just
going off
giving-
your feelings and what you think to overcharge. People have been overcharged before.
It should be based on my yes.
No, I'm
some
saying
people
like
are
people have
overcharged.
so if they're looking at this by the book and saying, let's not do an overreach here. Let's not.
Yeah.
Let's make sure this makes sense.
Right.
Why are you saying
3 years,
I feel that
3
you
years
should?
in solitary confinement for trespassing in the U.S. Capitol is overcharging. 15 years for cold-blooded, premeditated murder would be undercharging.
But why, if they overcharge him,
it's just my opinion.
But if they, let's say they undercharge him and it's 15 to life, you know, he might get the highest end of that lower sentence.
And I hope he does.
Versus terrorism, and then he gets 5 years because that charge was so extreme or something. Like, you know, like tell me how you want that to be handled. If he gets life, then everyone should be happy.
The minimum is life.
Well, everyone should be happy if he gets life on the same.
I
you know
agree.
what I mean?
I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't care. Right. I don't care if you call it terrorism or just murder. I don't.
You just
care
want
what
to see him in
call
jail
it.
for more than 15 years.
I want to see him in jail for the rest of his life or dead, because he killed someone
And
with no mitigating factors. No, it wasn't a fight. It wasn't not even like a one-off psychotic episode. He planned it out.
Right.
It was planned out, and it was motivated by some broader cause, that type of thing. They're not mitigating factors.
Well, terrorism is really meant to destabilize public order, and what he did, I think the courts found that they don't find that it destabilized public order in any way. They found that he committed a crime because he had these gripes against the healthcare system.
It hasn't destabilized public order is too nebulous for me. Maybe it's destabilized public order? What do you mean? We're
That's what
talking
they're
about
saying.
the health. He succeeded in drawing attention to the dysfunction in the healthcare industry, and there are
Okay,
tons
but
of
9/11
conversations.
destabilized public order. You understand
was
you understand? There's no confusion about that. Like the
was a
country
much
was
more
destabilized.
significant thing involving
Which is
many
why it was
deaths.
very clearly terrorism charges across the board for everyone involved. And that's kind of why I'm thinking.
So you have to be part of a group that's designated a terrorist group, and that's what makes it terrorism? That
No, but you can be charged with murder and still get the fullest extent of the law put against you and commit your time. I mean, go to jail. Like, why does that bother you? That's the part that I really want to get to the bottom of. I don't think that everyone's a Luigi
all that bothers
Mangione
me is
supporter.
the idea of him getting too lenient a sentence. That's all that bothers me.
And I would hope that our judicial system doesn't have people that are Luigi Mangione sympathizers, right?
Yeah, I hope they're not listening to the fangirls. It's utterly
Which would be
odious
absurd.
behavior. Good news for those of you coming up next who do use TikTok. There are details of an agreement, the aspects of a plan to keep that app still operating in the U.S. We'll tell you more. Stay with us.
We have a framework for a TikTok deal. The two leaders, President Trump and Party Chair Xi, will speak on Friday to complete the deal, but we do have a framework for a deal with TikTok.
That was a glimmer of hope for social media app TikTok and its 170 million U.S. users. Now, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, they're confirming that U.S. and China have reached a framework deal regarding the popular social media app.
Bessent says the goal is to switch ownership of the platform from ByteDance, a Chinese-owned company, to a U.S.-owned company. That announcement came from Bessent Monday, just hours after Trump indicated that he may not extend the ban on the app once again.
They're negotiating TikTok right now. We may let it die, or we may, I don't know, it depends, up to China. It doesn't matter too much. I'd like to do it for the kids, they like it.
Like to do it for the kids.
Oh, gosh.
Trump is set to meet with Xi Jinping in Madrid on Friday. So remember, the situation is that Congress voted on a bipartisan basis to ban TikTok, citing national security concerns. President Joe Biden signed that ban into law. The Supreme Court signed off on the ban because it was challenged on First Amendment grounds. I found the First Amendment arguments persuasive to me, but the Supreme Court ruled unanimously the other way. Justice Neil Gorsuch, who's arguably the Supreme Court justice closest to my own opinions, had an opinion that was like, I'm kind of uncomfortable doing with this, and I really don't like doing it based on evidence that they're not letting the other side see, because they're saying, we can't tell you, it's national security, but we can't tell you why it's national security. We can't tell you that.
Right.
But nevertheless, fine, ban it. Then this happened just as Trump was taking office, and Trump was like, I don't really want to ban it, though. And even Democrats were like, well, we don't really want to ban it now either. And so they just decided not to, even though it was signed into law and passed by the president. So they've been trying to negotiate this deal, And I don't want to see TikTok banned because I do think it's a First Amendment issue, frankly. I think TikTok may not have rights because they're not an American company, but we must always remember that the First Amendment does not affirmatively say, here is a group of individuals who have rights. It restricts the government's behavior. It says the government shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. A law that prevents me, a citizen of the United States, from seeing content on a Chinese app seems to me to be abridging my First Amendment rights. Not necessarily, China doesn't have First Amendment rights, but mine. So that's why I was not for banning it. I hope a deal is reached because, millions of people in the U.S. use this as their livelihood.
Right.
So,
and we saw a lot of people rallying against this idea.
Yeah, the president of TikTok said, thank you, President Trump, for saving TikTok. And this is it's not the entire story, but it's part of the Gen Z switch toward Trump winning the category, Trump doing so well with young people, is in part because he's the savior of TikTok.
Well, we've all seen this movie before. President Trump says he's close to a deal, and then boom, doesn't happen. So we know, everybody knows where I'm going with this.
Here's your taco.
Trump TikToko. Okay, this is the third time when he gets all the way to Beijing and they're like, nah, it's not going to work for us. And TikToko gets bullied into, given a new deadline, a new extension. The deadline was today. It was Wednesday. We're passing and going. TikToko's letting it go. And we're going to go to Friday and have a conversation for the first time with China about what the plan is. And
Tuesday.
Hopefully we'll talk about it on Taco Tuesday about whether this is accomplished. But you know what? On a serious note, my biggest issue is that, as we start to force the sale of this company and figure out what the next steps are, a lot of the people that would potentially be the new owners are Republican allies, or people that have donated to the Republican Party, like Andreessen Horowitz donated a ton, millions to Super PAC, Right for America. Obviously the Oracle CEO, Larry Ellison. And so I just don't want to see TikTok, which is this beautiful, funny app that I use sparingly, but a lot of my friends love and use a lot, and people have much success on, become the next X, which to me, as you know how I feel about X, don't love it since Elon Musk took it over. Think it became ridiculous and negative and the worst, where TikTok is insightful and inspiring still and actually meant to be what it was created to be.
Well, there should just be competition. Competition is healthy for the marketplace in social media, and if you start banning companies, that might make Facebook and X more of a monolith, and I don't think that's good. I think they should face competition. That does it for us today on Rising Live. Thanks so much for watching, and look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill so you never miss any of our content. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.